You never really expect life to take such sharp turns. Honestly, I didn't see any of it coming at the time. Things were running on a routine, nothing too complicated. My wife and I had been married for years, and I thought everything was rock solid. I'm the kind of guy who values structure and stability. Discipline, loyalty, and commitment. Those are my core principles, and I live by them. It's how I was raised. I expected my wife to hold up the same values, no more, no less. I've always been pretty straightforward. If there's a problem, you deal with it head-on. No drama, no mind games. That approach has worked for me in my career, and it worked in my life too. I was the one people came to for tough decisions, the guy who could handle pressure without breaking. My wife knew that side of me from day one. Respect, honesty, loyalty, those were non-negotiables for me. Now, my wife, she had a different vibe. She was more open, more social, and connected with people in ways I just didn't. I'm not much for small talk or socializing, but I never minded her being outgoing. In a way, it balanced us out. She'd always tell me, "You can't control everything." And while I'd usually just brush that off, I knew she believed it. But in my world, control was everything. Still, I never wanted to smother her. She had her space and I had mine. I never thought I had any reason not to trust her. I was always busy with work, and she had her own routine too. We had this unspoken agreement. We respected each other's independence. She never questioned me and I never questioned her. Looking back, maybe that was my first mistake. Maybe I should have paid more attention to her need for connection, but at the time, I just didn't see it. I wasn't the jealous type, never had a reason to be. I figured our bond was stronger than whatever could come between us. But bonds, no matter how strong, can be tested. And when they break, it's not always some dramatic explosion. It can be quiet, creeping in slowly. One evening, she came home more energized than usual. I was in the living room, sorting through some paperwork, and she dropped her bag by the door, sighing loudly to get my attention. "You won't believe this," she said, almost laughing. "We've decided to start doing some team building after work. To get to know each other better." I looked up, not seeing anything off about it. "Team building, huh?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She shrugged and came to sit beside me. "Yeah, we've been working together for months, but it feels like we barely know each other outside the office. We figured meeting up for drinks or hitting a bar a couple of times a week might help us loosen up and get to know one another better. Now, I've always had good relationships with my colleagues. We'd go out for drinks or have BBQs at someone's house, so I didn't see anything strange about this team-building idea." "Sounds good," I told her. "It's important to know the people you work with. It'll make things smoother." She seemed relieved by my reaction. "I figured you'd understand. You're always so good at balancing work and social stuff," she said, smiling. "I've never really done this kind of thing before. Usually, I keep my work and personal life separate, but this might be a good change." I nodded. From where I stood, it was all normal. People spending time with colleagues outside of work was nothing new. It made sense, and I didn't think twice about it. She worked hard, and if this helped her enjoy her job more, I had no reason to say no. I trusted her. We'd been together long enough for me to feel sure she wouldn't put herself in any risky situations. That night, I didn't dwell on it. If anything, I was happy she was finding ways to connect with her coworkers. But what I didn't realize then was that this team buildings thing wasn't as innocent as I thought. It was the start of something that would slowly unravel everything I thought I knew. The night came when she had her first team building outing, and I remember it clearly. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a regular evening, except she came home different. It was late, later than usual, and I was in the living room, half watching TV while waiting for her. The door opened with a loud thud, and she stumbled in, a little off balance. I glanced over and immediately knew she was drunk. Not blackout drunk, but tipsy enough to be obvious. She kicked off her shoes carelessly by the door and gave me a sheepish smile, trying to act like everything was normal. I asked casually, "How did it go?" She giggled, her speech slightly slurred. "It was fun. You know how it is, a few drinks, everyone loosening up." She plopped down next to me on the couch, leaning back like she was exhausted. Then she added, almost like it was no big deal, There was this one drunk guy who got a little too close, though, that made me sit up. What guy? I asked, my voice calm but with a hint of concern. She waved her hand dismissively, rolling her eyes. Oh, it was nothing. Just some random drunk idiot trying to hit on me, but don't worry, my colleague stepped in and made sure the guy left me alone. He even walked me home. She said it like she was grateful, as if her colleague had done her a favor. I watched her closely, trying to gauge how she felt about it, but she seemed completely unbothered, like it was just another part of the night. So he walked you all the way home? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Yeah, she nodded. But really it's fine. I know how you get, but nothing happened. He's just a friend, and he was just making sure I got home safely. She was looking at me, waiting for some kind of reaction, but honestly, I didn't feel anything in that moment. Jealousy wasn't something I struggled with. I trusted her. Jealous? No, I said calmly. I just care that nobody crossed a line. If he didn't touch you or try anything, it's fine. From what she was saying, it seemed her colleague had just been looking out for her. At the time, I wasn't too concerned. But I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, though I didn't understand it yet. I decided to let it go, though, telling myself it was nothing. After that night, things started to change, though not all at once. It was subtle at first. Over the next few weeks, I noticed her phone buzzing more and more, especially in the evenings. Whether we were eating dinner or just sitting together watching TV, her phone was constantly going off with messages. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was sociable, after all, and this new team-building thing had probably made her even closer to her coworkers. But as the days passed, it became impossible to ignore. One night, as we were sitting together, her phone buzzed again, probably the 100th time that day. I glanced over and casually asked, "Who keeps texting you so much?" She didn't miss a beat, just shrugged like it was no big deal. Oh, it's just a friend from work. She's been asking me to join her for yoga classes. Honestly, I'm not that into it, but she's really persistent. She said it casually, her tone light, almost dismissive. But the constant notifications didn't seem to match up with how little she made it out to be. Still, I brushed it off. If it was just a friend from work, there wasn't much reason to worry, right? Then, a few days later, something happened that started turning that gut feeling into something more. We were getting ready to leave the house, and she was rushing, trying to gather all her stuff. In her hurry, her phone slipped from her hand and crashed onto the floor. The screen shattered instantly. Great, she muttered under her breath as she bent down to pick it up. I watched her, then stepped over to take a look. Looks like we're going to need a new one, I said, and she nodded, clearly frustrated. That evening, we went to the store to replace her phone. We picked out a new model, and within an hour, she had a brand new device in her hands. The old one, the one that had been buzzing constantly, was now broken and set aside for repair. She quickly transferred her contacts and messages to the new phone, and things went back to normal, or so I thought. The strange thing was, after that, the yoga plans seemed to disappear. I didn't hear much about her friend again, and I didn't push it. People lose touch all the time, and I had other things on my mind. But then, even with her new phone, the constant texts didn't stop. Every day, her phone would light up with notifications, and it wasn't long before I started feeling suspicious. Nobody, I thought, spends that much time chatting with a friend from work, especially not about yoga classes. It didn't make sense. Something wasn't adding up, and the more I tried to ignore it, the louder that uneasy feeling grew. The uneasy feeling kept gnawing at me. I wasn't the kind of guy who got paranoid, but something just didn't sit right. Her phone buzzing nonstop didn't match the casual story she had told me about some work friend and yoga classes. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. No one texts that much about something as simple as yoga. Then I remembered her old phone. The one she had broken and set aside for repairs. It had been gathering dust since we got her a new one, and I hadn't really given it much thought. But now, curiosity, and maybe something more, was eating away at me. I wanted answers, and that phone might hold them. One afternoon, when she wasn't home, I decided to take the broken phone to a repair shop. I told myself it was just to fix it, no big deal. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that all this was just in my head. But another part of me needed to know. I wasn't the kind of guy to let doubts linger. A few days later, the phone was ready. I brought it home, sat down at the kitchen table and stared at it for a while. My gut was churning, but I knew I had to go through with it. I unlocked the phone and went straight to her Instagram messages. At first, everything seemed normal, just your typical friendly banter. But then I saw his name, the colleague who had walked her home that night from the bar. The guy she said was just a friend. My heart started pounding as I opened their chat. What I saw next wasn't just innocent conversation. There were pictures, intimate ones. And the messages, well, they weren't the kind of messages you send to a friend. It was clear that this had been going on for a while. The way they talked, the things they said to each other, it made my blood boil. They had crossed every line and then some. But what really hit me, what made it worse, was that he knew about me. This wasn't some clueless guy who had no idea she was married. No, he knew exactly who I was. He even used it against her. One message, in particular, stood out. "Your husband's not a wall," he wrote. "He'll move out of the way eventually." And the worst part? She laughed. She actually laughed and agreed with him, like this was all some game. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the rage build inside me. But it wasn't the kind of rage that makes you lose control. No, this was different. It was cold, calculated. I wasn't going to explode. I was going to plan. If they thought I was going to sit back and let them make a fool out of me, they were dead wrong. I wasn't the kind of man to be disrespected in my own home, by my own wife. They thought they were clever, sneaking around behind my back, but they had no idea who they were messing with. Now, I had the information I needed. The truth was out in the open, and the advantage was mine. But I wasn't going to confront her right away. That would be too easy. No, I wanted them to feel the weight of their betrayal. I wanted to catch them off guard, hit them where it hurt the most. That night, I waited. I knew she wasn't planning to go out, so it was the perfect time to set things in motion. She came home at the usual time, acting like nothing had changed. She sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I kept my cool, not letting on that I knew anything. We exchanged the usual small talk, how her day was, what we should have for dinner. But in my mind, I was already preparing for the next step. After a while, I told her I needed to use the bathroom. She didn't suspect a thing. I got up, grabbed her phone from the table, and headed to the bathroom, making sure to close the door behind me. Inside, I pulled out her old phone, the one I had repaired. I logged into her Instagram account and went straight to the chat with him. I typed out a message, keeping it short but clear. "Don't ask questions. Just bring a bottle of wine and come over. My husband isn't home." I hit send and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. It didn't take long for him to respond. "On my way," he replied. Just like that. No hesitation. He thought he had a free pass to my house, to my wife. Little did he know, he was walking straight into a trap. I put her phone back where it was and returned to the living room like nothing had happened. She didn't even notice. She had no clue that the man she'd been sneaking around with was on his way, thinking I wasn't home. Everything was falling into place. Now, all I had to do was wait. The minutes ticked by slowly, but I kept my cool. I wasn't the type to lose my temper easily, and this wasn't about blowing up. This was about control. Control over the situation, control over them. They thought they were clever, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Then, finally, the doorbell rang. I saw the confusion on her face as she looked up from her phone, clearly not expecting anyone. "Who could that be?" she mumbled. I stood up, hiding the satisfaction building inside me. "I'll get it," I said casually, as if nothing was wrong. But inside, I was already smiling, knowing exactly who was standing on the other side of that door. I walked to the door, my heart racing but my face calm. When I peeked through the peephole, there he was, standing there, bottle of wine in hand, with a smug look on his face. He had no idea what was about to hit him. I opened the door, and before he could even say a word, I grabbed him by the collar. His eyes widened in shock, finally realizing way too late that he had walked straight into my trap. Without saying a thing, I yanked him inside and slammed him up against the wall. The bottle of wine slipped out of his hand, shattering on the floor with a splash of red liquid that looked all too much like blood. He tried to swing at me, his punches wild and desperate, but he was no match. I dodged easily, landing a solid hit right to his gut. He doubled over, gasping for air, his face twisted in pain. But I didn't stop. I grabbed him by the back of his shirt and dragged him into the living room, where my wife stood frozen, her face drained of all color. She hadn't moved an inch since I opened the door, completely paralyzed by the scene unfolding before her. I didn't even glance her way. She didn't matter right now. All of my focus was on this worthless piece of trash in front of me. With one swift move, I shoved him into the armchair, forcing him to sit down. He clutched his stomach, still trying to catch his breath, his eyes darting around the room, maybe looking for a way out, but there was none. He was trapped, and he knew it. I towered over him, my fists clenched, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You think you're tough?" I growled, my voice low and dangerous. "You think you can just walk into my house, fool around with my wife, and get away with it?" He didn't respond. He was too winded to say anything, but his eyes were wide with fear, finally understanding just how deep he'd stepped in it. I didn't let up. I grabbed him by the collar again, yanking him closer. "You think you're special?" I spat. "You're nothing. Just some weak little man preying on someone else's wife because you can't get one of your own." I could feel my blood boiling, but I wasn't going to lose control. Not yet. I wanted him to hear every word, to feel every ounce of the humiliation he thought he could avoid. He finally managed to stammer something out, his voice weak, trembling. I didn't know." I cut him off, my voice sharp and full of contempt. "Bullshit. You knew exactly who I am. You knew she was married, and you still went after her." My gaze flicked toward my wife for the first time. She was still standing there, wide-eyed and silent, like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. But this was me, the real me, the husband she had betrayed. "And you," I said, turning my attention to her, the fury in my voice unmistakable. "You had everything. A home, a husband who gave you everything you could possibly need. And what did you do? You threw it all away, for this?" I gestured toward the man slumped in the chair. "For what? A cheap thrill?" She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. She knew she didn't have an answer that could justify any of this. The silence in the room was suffocating, thick with everything left unsaid. I turned back to him, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You think you're some big shot, don't you? Thought you could sneak around behind my back and I'd never find out. Well, guess what? You're both pathetic. One of you is a coward who goes after another man's wife, and the other is a woman who had it all and threw it away for someone like you. You deserve each other." The guilt was written all over her face now, but I didn't care. It was too late for apologies. Too late for explanations. The damage was done, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. I grabbed him by the collar again, lifting him out of the chair. He barely resisted. The fear had completely taken over. I shoved him toward the door, making sure he felt the full weight of my anger with every step. My face was inches from his, my voice low and full of menace. "If you ever so much as think about coming near her again, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" His eyes were wide with terror as he nodded frantically, too scared to speak. But I wasn't finished. "You come near her again, and I swear to God, I'll make sure you'll never walk again. You'll spend the rest of your pathetic life in a wheelchair." I wasn't the kind of man to make empty threats, and I could see in his eyes that he knew I meant every word. I let go of him, shoving him toward the door with one final push. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice ice cold. He didn't need to be told twice. He stumbled out the door, tripping over himself in his rush to leave, never daring to look back. As soon as he was gone, I turned around, the rage still pulsing through me. My wife stood there, still frozen in place, looking completely lost. She hadn't said a word the entire time, but I didn't care. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. Without saying a word, I walked past her and headed straight to the bedroom. She followed me, her voice finally finding some strength as she called my name, but I ignored her. I wasn't in the mood to hear anything she had to say. I threw open the closet doors and started pulling out her clothes, yanking them off the hangers and tossing them onto the floor without a second thought. She followed me into the room, her voice shaky as she pleaded, "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the window and started throwing her things out, one by one, onto the ground below. Shirts, dresses, shoes, everything went flying. She stood there, panicked, trying to stop me, but her words meant nothing to me now. "Please stop. Let's talk about this," she begged, her voice breaking. But it was too late for talking. Too late for anything. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. I kept tossing her things out the window, not caring how they landed. In my mind, I was clearing out the remnants of our life together, just like she had tossed away our marriage. When I had thrown out most of her things, I finally turned to face her. She was standing there, tears streaming down her face, looking desperate, but I didn't feel anything for her. Whatever sympathy or love I had once had for her was long gone. "You're done here," I said, my voice cold and firm. "Pack whatever's left and get out." "I'm done with you." She looked at me, stunned, like she couldn't believe I was serious. "You can't just throw me out like this," she said, her voice rising with panic. But I wasn't hearing any of it. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I stepped closer, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her toward the door. Her resistance was weak, almost like she knew deep down there was no way back from this. "Shut up," I hissed through gritted teeth. "Just shut your mouth." She kept trying to plead with me, her voice shaky and desperate, but I was done. I was done hearing excuses, lies, and pathetic attempts to justify what she had done. I covered her mouth with my hand, silencing her. "You've said enough," I told her. "It's over." Her eyes were wide with fear, but I didn't care anymore. There was nothing left to say. No way to fix this. I dragged her to the door, not giving her a chance to fight back, and flung it open. "I'm divorcing you," I said, my voice now calm but still firm. "It's done. There's no coming back from this. Get out of my house, and don't ever show your face here again." She stood there for a moment, like she was in shock, like she couldn't believe this was really happening. But it was. This was the end, and I was beyond ready for it. She stumbled out the door, her eyes wide with disbelief, and I slammed it shut behind her, the sound echoing in the silence. I stood there for a few moments, letting the weight of it all settle around me. The betrayal, the lies, the anger, it was all over now. The life we had built together, the memories we had shared, it was all gone. But strangely, I didn't feel the crushing weight of loss. Instead, I felt something else. Relief. I walked over to the window, looking down at the pile of her belongings scattered on the ground. It was a mess, just like our marriage had become. But for the first time in a long time, the house felt lighter. It was empty, sure, but in a way that made me feel free. I had taken back control of my life, and I wasn't weighed down by her lies anymore. The divorce was the next step. It was more of a formality than anything at that point, but the moment I made the decision, everything moved quickly. We both got lawyers, and the process started without much delay. I didn't drag it out with emotions or endless negotiations. I knew exactly what I wanted: freedom. I didn't want anything from her, and thankfully, she didn't fight me on it. In court, it felt surreal. There we were, sitting across from each other like strangers. She didn't look like the woman I had once known. She looked like a shell of her former self, almost like a ghost, hollowed out by the choices she had made. The tension was thick, but I felt nothing for her. No regret, no sadness. I had already come to terms with what had happened, and I was ready to move on. The judge spoke, and in a few short minutes, it was all over. "You are officially divorced," he declared. Just like that, it was done. I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I was free, but it also left me wondering what that freedom really meant. What came next? After the divorce, I threw myself into work. It was the one thing I could always count on, the one place where I felt in control. I started putting in extra hours, diving deep into my projects, and for the first time in years, I felt truly focused. The distraction of my broken marriage was behind me, and with it gone, I found clarity and purpose again. But work wasn't the only thing I had neglected during my marriage. Over the years, I had slowly drifted away from friends, prioritizing my relationship above everything else. After the divorce, I started reaching out to old friends, reconnecting with people I hadn't seen in years. I started going out more, meeting up for drinks, laughing, and just enjoying life again. It was like a part of me had been asleep for years, and I was finally waking up. Being around people who knew me before all the chaos helped me remember who I was, who I used to be. I wasn't just the guy who had been cheated on. I was more than that, and I was starting to feel that again. The pain of the betrayal still lingered, but it wasn't as heavy anymore. Each day, I felt lighter, more in control of my life. As for her, I heard through mutual friends that she was struggling after the divorce. Apparently, she had moved back in with her parents. From what I gathered, she was having a hard time coming to terms with the reality of her decisions. The life she had thought she wanted with someone else had crumbled, leaving her alone and full of regret. Did I feel sorry for her? Not even a little. She made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I had no pity for someone who threw away everything for a few moments of excitement, only to realize too late that it wasn't worth it. Months went by, and as time passed, I started noticing changes in myself. I was more guarded now, a little more cautious when it came to trusting people. But strangely enough, I also felt stronger. I wasn't in any rush to jump into another relationship. I wanted to take my time to really figure out what I wanted. I had learned the hard way that trust is fragile, that it has to be earned, not taken for granted. The experience had left me wary, but not bitter. I refused to let what had happened define me. I wasn't going to be the guy who got cheated on for the rest of my life. Instead, I focused on building a new foundation, one that I had complete control over. I had taken back my life, and I was going to do it right this time. Eventually, I started dating again, but I approached it differently. Slowly, carefully. I didn't dive in headfirst or let myself get carried away by emotions. Instead, I made sure that whoever I spent time with was upfront, honest, and independent. I found myself drawn to women who had their lives together, who didn't rely on anyone else to make them happy. It was refreshing, and little by little, I started to open up again. Each date was a small step toward healing, and I genuinely enjoyed the process. I wasn't in a rush to settle down. For the first time in a long time, I was just enjoying getting to know people without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. Looking back now, I realized that the divorce wasn't just an ending, it was also a new beginning. I had shed the weight of a toxic relationship and come out the other side stronger and more self-aware. I wasn't just the man who had been betrayed, I was someone who had learned valuable lessons about myself, about relationships, and about the importance of trust. The future still felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I didn't need all the answers right away. I was in control of my life again, and that was enough. I started thinking less and less about her, and more about the life I was building for myself. The freedom I felt was like a second chance at happiness, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head-on. The storm had passed, and I was finally able to breathe again. In the end, divorce had given me something I didn't even realize I needed, a fresh start. And as I moved forward, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't the same person I had been before. I was stronger, smarter, and ready to take on whatever life threw at me next. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. Thank you for visiting my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.